A quiet evening that didn't go without surprises. This evening was supposed to be just like any other. I came home from work, took off my shoes, hung my jacket and headed to the kitchen. Nothing special. The kettle filled with water and I put it on the stove to brew green tea, my usual remedy for relaxation after a long day. The room was warm, the soft light from the lamp illuminated my cosy corner. I felt no anxiety, just an evening to forget about work. When the kettle boiled, I returned to the living room, sat on the couch with a cup in my hands and turned on the TV. I started my favourite movie, immersing myself in a story that had calmed me many times after long days. The melody began and I forgot about everything that had happened throughout the day. And then, sitting in complete silence, I felt a strange, subtle sense of unease. It was unclear where it came from, but with every passing moment, it grew stronger, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just stress. But more and more thoughts swirled in my head, telling me that something was off this evening. The first strange signal. I set my cup down and returned to my movie when suddenly a notification flashed on my phone screen. Missed call. I raised an eyebrow. I've never liked calls, especially those that come out of nowhere without any warning. And now this number. Unfamiliar. Not saved in my contacts. A strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe it's just a mistake. Maybe someone dialed the wrong number. But why now, at this moment? I thought maybe I should ignore it and continue watching, but something inside me made me pick up the phone. Why? Just a habit, maybe. I tapped the screen to take a closer look at the number. It was long but unfamiliar. I glanced at the screen again, trying to figure out where this call could have come from. Could it be a work-related number? But I couldn't remember anything. Feeling slightly nervous, I decided to call back. The phone froze in my hand as I dialed the strange number. I waited, but the call didn't go through. Number unavailable, the voicemail said. I bit my lip, unsure of what to think. Maybe it's all just a coincidence, or maybe someone really dialed the wrong number. But a little spark of unease began to grow inside me, one that wouldn't die down. The strange call. I couldn't calm down. After failing to get through, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A strange hum buzzed in my mind, like something unfinished, something important but undefined. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I decided to call back. Maybe it was an error. Someone dialed the wrong number. That would make sense, right? I dialed the number again, not expecting an answer, but hoping to at least hear the voicemail. The calls kept going, one after another, and my heart began to race faster. Why was I doing this? Why did it matter so much to find out who this was? And why was I so afraid that I would hear nothing again? The call stopped, but the silence on the other end wasn't the usual kind. I waited, but all I heard was a faint rustling, soft, barely perceptible sounds, as if someone was trying to breathe into the phone. It was so weak that I couldn't tell if it was just static on the line or something else. I strained my ears trying to make sense of it. The sound seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite decipher it. My pulse quickened. "Hello," I said cautiously. But in response, nothing. Silence. And then, that faint rustling again. It was so close, as if someone was standing right next to me, breathing in my ear. Goosebumps ran down my skin, but I kept holding the phone. I tried to find an explanation in my head, but I couldn't. It wasn't like usual. It wasn't like someone just didn't pick up. The call suddenly cut off. Silence once again enveloped the room, but this time it felt different. It was muffled, dark. Even the air felt heavy. I hung up, but the feeling of anxiety still lingered. The stifling feeling in the apartment. I stood in the silence, still holding the phone in my hands. The unsettling feeling from the strange call hadn't left me for a second. Suddenly, it was as though the entire room had lost its usual atmosphere. I looked around and immediately felt how the air had grown heavy. Not in the sense of heat, no. It was as though the air had become thick, like something dense was hanging in the room. I tried to figure out what exactly had changed, but I couldn't find a logical explanation. Something was wrong. Something was off. I felt a tightness in my chest and suddenly noticed that the ceiling seemed to have lowered slightly. No physical pressure, but I could feel it on my skin, as if it was pressing in on me. The house had grown eerily quiet. Not just silence, but a dull, dragging kind of quiet, as though this moment had gotten stuck, not moving forward. I felt suffocated by the air, and the decision to do something came on its own. I needed to do something, change something, even though I knew it was strange. After all, a closed window couldn't cause such a shift. I stood up and walked toward the window, trying to push away the thoughts that the apartment had become unnervingly foreign. As I opened the window, I felt a small relief as a bit of fresh air entered the room. Though, strangely, it felt slightly heavy, as though the space beyond my apartment was also different. The suffocating sense of unease wouldn't leave me. The air no longer felt clean. But something inside me whispered, "Open the window, and everything will be fine." I took a deep breath, watching as the curtain slowly began to stir in the breeze, as if that small gust of wind could change everything. But the heaviness in the room remained. Looking at the window, watching it open, left an imprint on my heart, as if it would stay with me forever. I felt again that something was wrong, that things weren't as they should be, and with that feeling I was left alone in my apartment. Another cool silence had settled in the apartment again, and only the faint hum of the TV broke the stillness. I sat there still feeling the heavy, strange atmosphere in the air that I couldn't explain. Thoughts, tearing through the space in my head, collided, as if someone were deliberately making me question my familiar reality. And then, another call. Another one. The same number. My gaze fell to the screen, and I felt everything inside tighten. The same unfamiliar number had appeared. It was him, the strange number that I couldn't forget. The thoughts that had, until now, tried to ignore everything that had happened, now became uncontrollable. I picked up the phone almost instinctively, not letting myself slow down, not giving fear a chance to overtake me. I needed to know what this was, what all of this meant. "Hello," I said, my voice slightly trembling, but still firm. On the other end, silence. Not just silence, but a kind of unbearably suffocating silence. It felt like someone was standing on the edge between worlds, and either couldn't or didn't want to break that fragile barrier. I tried to listen for any sounds within the silence, but something had changed in the room. This wasn't the simple, familiar call. I opened my mouth to say something again, but then a rustle. Faint, almost imperceptible. As if someone was very carefully, with minimal effort, holding their breath to keep me from hearing a word. And in that moment, when the air around me felt thicker, I heard it, barely audible, as if behind a wall. It wasn't breathing. It was a whisper. No, not a whisper, it was a voice. Its quiet, barely discernible tone overwhelmed everything around me, and every word it spoke seemed to penetrate straight into my consciousness. "You're not alone." At that moment, something clicked in my mind. I couldn't understand what exactly he wanted to say. Why those words, and why did he say them like that? But then the connection was lost. An unnatural, dull sound on the other end of the line. And that was it. Silence. It wasn't a mistake. This call was something more. What was it? Who was it? And why did I feel like I shouldn't have answered that call? No one speaks, but she hears the voice. Silence. But not just any silence. It was heavy, suffocating. As if someone was on the other end of the line, but intentionally refusing to speak. It was as if the very air inside the phone had become stuck, waiting for something to happen. I gripped the phone tighter, pressing it closer to my ear, in a futile attempt to make out anything. My heart beat in an anxious rhythm. "Hello," I whispered, feeling my voice tremble, betraying me. There was no response, only silence. But then, a whisper. Soft, barely audible, as though someone was speaking directly into the phone from a very far place. "Don't open the window." I froze. A cold lump rose in my throat. It was only 3 words, but they penetrated deep into my consciousness, clinging to my inner fear, to something primal hidden in my mind. I quickly glanced around. The window. It was open. I had just opened it myself, but who knew? But who? I desperately tried to comprehend what I had just heard. The voice wasn't just strange, it was familiar, but I couldn't place who it belonged to. It was as if I had heard it before, but my memory refused to give it up. "Who are you?" I asked louder than I intended. The whisper faded, and then the connection was lost. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen. There was no call in the history. Everything inside me turned cold. But that wasn't the scariest part. I turned back to the window. The curtains swayed softly in the light night breeze. And outside, the street was dark, but I thought I saw movement. Something was standing there, a vague silhouette right under my window. Unusual events in the apartment. With every passing moment, the silence in the apartment grew increasingly strange. I returned to the table, lowering the phone, trying to regain some semblance of normalcy on this unsettling night. But then I felt the cold. It was unusual. I always kept my apartment warm, yet now it felt as though someone had opened a window, as though an invisible force was pulling the warmth out of the room. I glanced at the thermometer. The temperature had dropped a few degrees. Probably just a draft, I thought, but I didn't really believe that. The candles on the table flickered, their flames dancing erratically and almost going out. I held my hand near them, trying to understand what was happening, but there was no draft, just that inexplicable cold, growing stronger with each passing minute. I turned toward the hallway. Footsteps, soft but distinct, like someone was slowly moving down the long corridor, walking quietly as though afraid to disturb the silence. I froze. I was alone. No one had come. My friends had gone away for the weekend, and I was here in my empty apartment. The footsteps repeated. They were getting closer, and before I could even fully process what I was doing, I stepped toward the hallway door, nearly opening it. My gaze darted into the darkened space, but there was no one there, just emptiness. I stood still, shaken and confused. Somewhere deep in my mind, I told myself this could be just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I heard the footsteps again, slow, distinct. They were coming toward me. I turned and walked back into the room, glancing over my shoulder. There were no signs of movement, nothing. But those footsteps, they couldn't have been mine. The disappearing number. I still felt the chill in the air, but I decided to try and find some kind of explanation for what was happening. The call, the whisper in the phone, it was all too strange. Maybe it was a mistake. I figured that if I called back, maybe everything would clear up. Maybe it was some kind of phone glitch or someone who dialed the wrong number. I grabbed my phone and dialed the same number that had appeared on the screen. My fingers froze on the keys. My heart raced, but I pressed call with determination. The dial tones echoed in the silence, and it felt like they were bouncing off the walls of my apartment. After a few seconds, the voicemail picked up. This number does not exist. Really? I tried again. No change, I couldn't believe it. There had been a number on the screen and now it had disappeared. Could it be a connection error? Or a network failure? But something in my mind whispered that this wasn't just a coincidence. I tried searching for the number online. No mentions, no results. It was as if the number had never existed. I checked the contact list again. No changes. It was still there, just like before. I paused. Someone had tried to contact me. Someone I didn't know, and that someone knew more about me than I could have ever imagined. The creaking door. I lay in bed, almost fully consumed by thoughts of the strange events that had unfolded over the past few hours. The room had become so quiet that I could hear every sound, every rustle. The silence felt eerie, suffocating. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I heard the creaking of a door. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then the sound repeated, and I distinctly heard something squeak on the floor. Someone, or something, was moving by the door. My heart skipped a few beats. I froze, straining to listen. This was more than just noise. It was actual movement, as if someone were trying to enter or leave the room. I got out of bed, feeling my muscles tense up, and cautiously walked over to the door. Fearing to see something I didn't want to, I slowly approached and checked if it had been opened. The door was locked, just as I had left it, but something inside me still felt that creak. I couldn't understand where it came from, and why it still echoed in my mind. I turned and looked towards the bathroom. That's when I noticed the mirror. It was slightly fogged up. This was strange. There was no humidity in the room, no source of steam. I hadn't taken a shower, nor had I turned on hot water. But the mirror was fogged, as if someone had just been looking into it or standing in front of it. I stood in silence, staring at the mirror, unable to comprehend what was happening. Why was it fogged up? Who could have been in the bathroom? And in that moment, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The last call. At the moment I was still standing in front of the mirror, almost in slow motion. My phone rang again. It vibrated on the table, creating the sensation that the world had shrunk back into this moment. I couldn't move, but despite the fear, I picked up the receiver. At first there was silence. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to it, as though it were in an empty void. Then, my name, my full name, Anna. I felt a coldness spread over me. Someone knew me so intimately, speaking my name with such a strange yet familiar tone. It wasn't a voice I had heard before. It was unnaturally distorted, almost like the echo of an old memory, but I couldn't quite remember when I had last heard it. I didn't have the strength to respond. I felt something moving behind me. From somewhere on the landing, from beyond the wall, my mind immediately conjured the image of what I was supposed to see. With a wild surge of fear, I stood up and walked to the window. I held my breath. A moment later, in the dim light of the street lamps, I saw him, the figure standing still. He was standing directly in front of the stairs, as if frozen. His face wasn't visible. It blended with the darkness, but the figure was clear. He was tall, a dark silhouette, standing motionless and waiting. My legs buckled beneath me, and I instinctively recoiled from the window, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. Why did I look? Why? But I knew it wasn't just a feeling of fear. He was there, and he was waiting for me. Reality begins to crumble. It feels as though the world around me is losing its grip on reality. I stood by the window, but now even the air in the apartment had become heavy, as though it were compressing, trying to trap me in its dark, suffocating grasp. The shadows had grown darker, and in them figures appeared, only to vanish the moment I tried to focus on them. I looked around the room, and at that moment, I realised that this wasn't just fear. It wasn't just a series of nighttime jitters. Everything had become wrong. Objects began moving on their own. The table by the wall shifted slightly, and I clearly saw a book fall from the shelf, but no one had touched it. I rushed over to the shelf to place it back, but at that exact moment, the light started to flicker. The light bulb couldn't find its brightness, flashing as though some invisible force was trying to make it fade. I tried to calm myself. I thought perhaps it was just stress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I was experiencing was real. Every movement in the apartment felt too real, every sound too sharp. I closed my eyes, but even then, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. The furniture in the room suddenly started to distort, like in a bad dream. The wardrobe by the window shifted, silently, without a sound. I jumped up and ran toward the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The doorknob was cold as ice and wouldn't move, as if someone was holding it on the other side. I knew I couldn't leave the apartment. I understood that it wouldn't let me go. Inside, I felt such fear that I could barely breathe. I realised that every moment here could be my last. Everything I saw felt like part of a nightmare. I tried to escape, but the forces keeping me here were stronger. No matter where I looked, everything around me was warping, like in a dark mirror, where something is always moving, but you can't figure out what it is. I stood in the centre of the room when I felt that strange presence again, as if something invisible was standing next to me, watching my every movement. My mind was empty, filled only with the dull, tightening fear. I couldn't breathe. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I looked into the mirror on the wall. My own figure reflected back at me, but something was wrong. My face was distorted. Its features were blurry, and my eyes were empty, lifeless. I couldn't understand what was happening. It was my face, but it wasn't mine. It was as though something from the outside was draining my essence, leaving only the shell behind. I stood there, unable to tear my gaze away from that monstrous reflection. With every second it grew stranger, as if it had been tethered to this room, to this place. I felt a chill run down my spine, and then the phone rang again. I froze, listening as the screen lit up with a number. It was unfamiliar, but I knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was all connected. I was afraid to pick up the phone, but my fingers moved toward it on their own. And then I answered. Silence. Then a voice. The same voice I had heard before. It sounded the same, but with a cold, distorted malice. "You shouldn't have opened the window." The words shot through me like a bolt of lightning. My body was overtaken by terror. I couldn't move. This wasn't just a warning. It was something much more dangerous. I looked back at the mirror. My distorted figure was no longer just a reflection. It didn't just mimic my movements. It started moving independently, slightly out of sync with me. With every glance at it, I lost more control. And in my mind, there was only one question left. How do I get out of here? I darted around the apartment, desperately trying to find a way out. My mind was overflowing with panic, and my body refused to obey. Everything around me was closing in, and it felt like the walls were literally squeezing me. I ran to the door. I must have made a mistake. Maybe I hadn't turned the handle right, or the lock had jammed. I grabbed the doorknob, pulled it down with all my strength, but nothing happened. The door didn't move. I pulled again. Empty. This couldn't be real. I screamed, but it was useless. The force holding the door was invisible yet tangible. I could feel the room grow darker, colder. Everything around me fell silent, as if time had frozen, and I was trapped in this nightmare. I turned around. The mirror across from me glinted with its cold glass, and in its reflection, the strange figure appeared again. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but it was there, a shadow. It was behind me, not in the mirror, but in the room itself, in the reality I could no longer perceive as my own. With each step I took, I felt as if everything familiar was slipping away from this reality. I couldn't understand where I was, who I was, or where the world I once knew had gone. This house was no longer a home. I had been left here as a prisoner, at the mercy of those on the other side of the mirror. It had always been there. It had always been watching me. And now I understood. I was trapped in this place, and worst of all, I couldn't escape anymore. Her voice echoed again in my head like a warning. "You shouldn't have opened the window." Now I knew that I wasn't just trapped in the apartment. I was trapped in this nightmare forever, and maybe this would be my forever. There was no more life, only the shadow following me in this house, where I would never find peace. I accepted this, and nothing could ever bring me back. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new creepy tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. We value your opinion. Bye for now. See you in the next video.